The silver spoon clattered against fine china as Cordelia Ashworth's hand trembled, watching the mountain of a man collapse against her mansion's ornate front door. 6 feet and 8 inches of weathered cowboy flesh pressed against the mahogany, his massive frame blocking out the afternoon sun, streaming through the stained glass windows. "I haven't eaten in 3 days," he rasped, his voice like gravel grinding against stone. "Feed me and I'll serve you." "Da!" Cordelia's pearl necklace caught the light as she stepped back, her emerald silk dress rustling against the marble floor. The stranger's clothes hung in tatters, leather chaps worn thin as paper, shirt that might have once been white now stained with dust and desperation. His hat lay crumpled at his boots, revealing hair black as midnight and eyes that burned like blue flames in a face carved by wind and hardship. "How did you get past my gates?" she demanded, though her voice carried more curiosity than fear. In all her 26 years as mistress of Ashworth's Manor, no one had breached her private sanctuary uninvited. "Walked," he said simply, swaying. "On his feet, been walking for a week straight after my horse died under me." The cowboy's massive hands pressed against the doorframe, knuckles white with the effort of staying upright. Cordelia had seen hungry men before, drifters, who sometimes appeared at her estate's edges, looking for work or charity. But none had possessed this man's raw magnetism, the dangerous energy that seemed to pulse beneath his starved exterior. "What's your name?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. "Maverick Ironhide," he said, his gaze never leaving hers. "I keep my word, ma'am. Feed me, and I'll work harder than any 10 men you've ever hired." Cordelia's emerald eyes swept over his imposing figure. Even weakened by hunger, he radiated a primal strength that made her pulse quicken. Her late husband's estate employed dozens of workers, but none had ever made such a bold proposition. None had ever looked at her with such unflinching intensity. "My staff handles hiring," she began. "I'm not talking to your staff," Maverick interrupted, pushing himself off the doorframe with visible effort. "I'm talking to you. The woman who owns everything as far as the eye can see, yet eats dinner alone every night." Heat flooded Cordelia's cheeks. How could the stranger know about her solitary meals, her empty dining room designed for 12, but occupied by one? "You're presumptuous," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "I'm honest," he countered. "Something tells me you haven't heard much of that lately." A gust of prairie wind caught the door, sending it creaking on its hinges. Maverick stumbled forward, and instinctively, Cordelia reached out to steady him. The moment her gloved hands touched his sunbrand's forearms, electricity shot through her veins like lightning striking dry grass. His skin burned with fever, but his muscles remained steel-hard beneath her touch. When their eyes met, she saw something that made her breath catch, not just hunger for food, but a deeper yearning that matched the ache she'd carried in her chest since becoming a widow 3 years ago. "Martha," she called to her housekeeper, "prepare the guest quarters and set an extra place for dinner." Maverick's lips curved into the first smile she'd seen from him, transforming his harsh features into something devastatingly handsome. "Much obliged, ma'am," he said. "You won't regret this." But as Cordelia watched him straighten to his full imposing height, she wondered if she already did. The dining room had never felt smaller. Cordelia sat at the head of her mahogany table, watching Maverick devour roast beef and potatoes with the intensity of a man who'd forgotten what real food tasted like. His table manners were surprisingly refined, despite his ravenous hunger, each bite deliberate and appreciative. "Slow down," she said softly. "The food isn't going anywhere." Maverick paused, a forkful of gravy-soaked meat halfway to his mouth. "Forgive me, ma'am. When you've been living on creek water and hope, a meal like this feels like a miracle." In the golden light of the chandelier, cleaned up and fed, he was even more striking than she'd first realized. His dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, and the sharp angles of his face had softened with nourishment. But those piercing blue eyes remained as intense as ever, studying her with an attention that made her feel exposed. "Tell me about your travels," Cordelia said, cutting delicately at her own meal. "What brought you to my doorstep half dead?" Maverick set down his fork, his expression growing distant. "Lost everything in a card game in Tombstone. Horse, money, even my gun. The man who won was generous enough to let me keep my life, but that was about it. Gambling debts? She murmured disapprovingly. Not debts, he corrected. Poor judgment. I thought I had a sure thing, but the cards had other plans. His gaze found hers across the table. Sometimes a man has to lose everything to find what he's really looking for. And what are you looking for, Mr. Ironhide? The question hung between them like smoke from the fireplace. Maverick leaned back in his chair, his massive frame dwarfing the delicate furniture. Purpose, he said finally. Been drifting for 5 years since the war ended. Fought for the Union, came home to find my family's ranch burned to nothing. Been searching for something worth fighting for ever since. Cordelia felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. Understand loss, she said quietly. A riding accident 3 years ago? It's left me with more money than I know what to do with, and a house that echoes with loneliness. Why haven't you remarried? Beautiful woman like you. With all this, he gestured around the opulent room. Must. Have suitors lining up from here to San Francisco. Because they want my money, not me, she replied with bitter honesty. Every eligible bachelor in 3 counties sees dollar signs when they look at me. Maverick's eyes darkened, and they're fools. The simple declaration sent heat spiraling through her chest. When was the last time a man had looked at her and seen Cordelia the woman, rather than Cordelia the wealthy widow? You don't even know me, she protested. I know enough. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. I know you fed a starving stranger without asking questions. I know you eat alone because you'd rather have solitude than false company. I know you're strong enough to run an empire, but gentle enough to worry about a man eating too fast. Cordelia's breath caught. Mr. Ironhide Maverick, he corrected, and I meant what I said about serving you. Put me to work, Mrs. Ashworth. Let me earn my keep. The ranch work is hard, she warned, brutal in this heat. A slow smile spread across his face. Ma'am, I've broken wild horses, driven cattle through blizzards, and fought in battles that would turn your hair white. I reckon I can handle whatever you throw at me. Outside, thunder rumbled across the prairie, promising rain. Cordelia stood and walked to the window, aware of Maverick's eyes following her every movement. Lightning illuminated the vast expanse of her land, thousands of acres of grassland and cattle that stretched to the horizon. My foreman died last month, she said without turning around. Dang. The men have been managing themselves, but they need leadership. Give me the job, Maverick said simply. She spun to face him. You don't understand. These men have been here for years. They won't take orders from a drifter. Maverick stood, his full height casting a shadow across the room. Then I'll make them respect me. The certainty in his voice made her pulse race. This was madness, hiring a stranger, a gambler who'd lost everything. But something in his eyes promised that he was exactly what her ranch needed. What she needed, dawn broke blood red over the Ashworth ranch, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson. Cordelia watched from her bedroom window as Maverick emerged from the bunkhouse, his silhouette cutting an imposing figure against the morning light. Even from this distance, she could see the tension in his broad shoulders as he approached a group of ranch hands gathered near the corral. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with doubts about her impulsive decision. By lamplight, hiring a mysterious drifter as foreman had seemed reasonable. In the harsh light of morning, it felt like madness. This should be interesting, she murmured, pulling on her riding jacket. By the time she reached the corral, voices were already raised. Buck Whitmore, her most senior hand, stood chest to chest with Maverick despite being dwarfed by the bigger man's frame. I've been working this ranch for 15 years, Buck snarled. Ain't taking orders from some saddle tramp who wandered in begging for scraps? Then don't, Maverick said calmly. Take orders from the man Mrs. Ashworth appointed to run this operation. She don't know what she's doing, another hand called out. Grief's made her soft-headed. The words hit Cordelia like a slap, but before she could respond, Maverick moved. In one fluid motion, he grabbed the speaker by his shirt and lifted him clean off the ground with one massive hand. Speak about Mrs. Ashworth with respect, Maverick, said his voice deadly quiet, or find somewhere else to work. Put him down. Buck reached for his gun, but Maverick was faster. Without releasing his grip on the first man, He caught Buck's wrist in an iron grip that made the older cowboy cry. Out. Gentlemen, Cordelia called out, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. I believe introductions are in order. All eyes turned to her as she approached, her riding boots clicking against the packed earth. She'd dressed deliberately this morning. Leather pants that hugged her curves, a fitted jacket that emphasized her figure, her golden hair braided severely back. If these men thought grief had made her weak, she'd prove them wrong.
Ass.
Ironhide, your new foreman, she announced. He has my complete authority to run operations as he sees fit. Maverick released both men, who stumbled backward, rubbing their wrists. His blue eyes found hers across the circle of cowboys, and she saw approval, their respect for her strength in backing his play. She continued, Mr. Ironhide informs me that the south pasture fence needs repair, and we have 200 head of cattle that need moving to higher ground before the next storm. I suggest you get started. The ranch hands exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, Buck spat in the dust. Fine, he said, but when this goes sideways, don't come crying to us. Us. As the men dispersed, muttering among themselves, Maverick approached. Cordelia. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the small scar along his jaw that spoke of past violence. Thank you, he said simply. Don't thank me yet, she replied. Prove you deserve the position. Something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps at her directness. Fair enough. But I should warn you, Mrs. Ashworth. Cordelia, she interrupted. If we're going to work together, we might as well use first names. His smile was slow and devastating. Cordelia, then? I should warn you that I don't do things the easy way. Good, she said, surprising herself with her vehemence. This ranch has been run the easy way for too long. The morning sun climbed higher, beating down on the dusty corral as Maverick began organizing the work crews. Cordelia found herself lingering, ostensibly to observe but really to watch the way he moved, with an economy of motion that spoke of absolute confidence in his own strength. When one of the younger hands struggled with a particularly ornery horse, Maverick stepped in. Instead of force, he used patience, his massive hands gentle as he calmed the animal with soft words and steady presence. He's different than I expected, Martha said, appearing at Cordelia's elbow with a cup of coffee. How so? Most men, his size, use their strength like a club, the housekeeper observed. He uses his like a tool only, when needed, and never more than necessary. Cordelia watched Maverick help the young cowboy mount the now docile horse. His encouragement genuine and free of mockery, as she murmured, I noticed that too. Be careful, child, Martha said quietly. A man like that could break your heart as easily as he could break bones. But as Maverick's eyes met hers across the corral, his gaze warm with approval and something deeper, Cordelia wondered if her heart was already in more danger than she'd realized. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first drops of rain began to fall. The storm hit with the fury of divine wrath, turning the ranch into a battleground of mud and lightning. Cordelia stood on the covered porch, rain lashing at her face as she watched. Maverick and the hands struggled to secure the barn doors against the howling wind. A crack of thunder split the air, followed immediately by a woman's scream from the direction of the workers' quarters. Without thinking, Cordelia plunged into the storm, her boots sinking into the muddy ground with each step. She found Betty Clearwater, the cook's wife, standing in the doorway of her cabin, clutching her swollen belly. The baby's coming? Betty gasped. It's too early. It's supposed to be for another month. Cordelia's mind raced. The nearest doctor was in town, 20 miles away through flood-prone terrain. In this storm, the roads would be impassable. Martha, she called over the wind, boil water and get clean sheets. Through the chaos of rain and shouting, she saw Maverick approaching, his massive frame cutting through the storm like a ship through rough seas. What's wrong? He demanded. Betty's in labor, Cordelia shouted back. We need to get her inside. The main house. Without hesitation, Maverick scooped the laboring woman into his arms as gently as if she were made of glass. Lead the way, he said. They fought their way to the mansion, Maverick's body shielding Betty from the worst of the storm. Once inside, he carried her straight to the guest room, his boots leaving muddy tracks on Cordelia's pristine floors. Helped birth foals, he said quietly to Cordelia as they settled Betty on the bed. It's not the same, but it's more experience than I have. Cordelia replied grimly. For the next 6 hours, they worked together in ways that defied every social convention Cordelia had ever known. A wealthy widow and a vagrant cowboy there. Hands joined in the ancient struggle of bringing new life into the world. Maverick's massive hands proved surprisingly gentle, supporting Betty through each contraction while Cordelia monitored the baby's progress. When the moment came, it was Maverick who caught the tiny, slippery form and cleared the infant's airway with the skill of someone who'd faced life and death situations before. It's a girl, he announced, his voice thick with emotion as the baby's first cry filled the room. Cordelia felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she helped clean the infant and place her in Betty's arms. The storm outside was beginning to subside, but inside the room, a different kind of electricity crackled between her and Maverick. Thank you, Betty whispered, her eyes shining as she looked down at her daughter. Both of you. I don't know what would have happened if... Don't think about that, Cordelia said softly. She's perfect. As Betty dozed with her baby, Cordelia and Maverick found themselves alone in the hallway. His shirt was stained with mud and worse, his dark hair plastered to his skull, but she'd never seen him look more magnificent. You were incredible in there, she said. So were you, he replied. I've seen battlefield surgeons with less steady hands. They stood facing each other in the dim hallway, the intimacy of shared crisis hanging between them like a live wire. Cordelia became acutely aware of how close he was standing, how his blue eyes seemed to see straight through to her soul. Maverick, she began, but he stepped closer. Close enough that she could smell the rain on his skin, the masculine scent that was uniquely his. I know I'm not good enough for you, he said roughly. No. I know I'm just a drifter with nothing to offer but these hands and whatever strength I have left. But Cordelia, don't, she whispered, but she didn't step away. I can't stop thinking about you, he continued, his voice raw with honesty. Every night in that bunkhouse I lie awake wondering what it would be like to hold you, to you. Work for me, she protested weakly. Then fire me, he said, his hands coming up to frame her face. Send me away if that's what it takes. Instead of pushing him away, her hands fisted in his wet shirt, pulling him closer. I can't, she admitted. God help me, I can't. When he kissed her, it was with the desperate hunger of a man who'd been starving for more than food. His lips were warm and firm, tasting of rain and possibility. Cordelia melted against him, her body responding to his touch with an intensity that terrified her. They broke apart when Martha's footsteps echoed in the hallway, but the damage was done. Careful distance she'd maintained had crumbled completely. This can't happen, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. It already has, Maverick replied, his thumb brushing across her swollen lips. The question is what we do about it. Outside, the storm was ending, but inside Cordelia's heart, hurricane was just beginning. 3 weeks passed in a dance of stolen glances and carefully maintained distance. Maverick threw himself into ranch work with the intensity of a man fighting his own desires, rising before dawn, and working until exhaustion claimed him. The other hands had begun to respect him, not just for his strength, but for his fairness and knowledge. Cordelia watched him from her study window, her ledgers forgotten as she observed the way he moved among the cattle, his presence calming even the most skittish animals. He'd proven himself 10 times over, increasing productivity and solving problems that had plagued the ranch for months, but it was the nights that tormented her most. Alone in her vast bedroom, she found herself imagining his hands on her skin, remembering the taste of his lips, the solid warmth of his body pressed against hers. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear Martha enter until the housekeeper cleared her throat. There's trouble in town, Martha announced without preamble. Buck rode in with news. Cordelia's attention snapped back to the present. What kind of trouble? Seems some of the townspeople are stirring up talk about you and Maverick, saying it's improper for a lady to be living on the same property as an unmarried man, especially one with his ... reputation. His reputation? Cordelia's voice turned dangerously quiet. They'd been asking questions about his past. Found out about the gambling, the fighting. Mrs. Pemberton is leading the charge. claiming it's a scandal that reflects poorly on the whole community. Cordelia's hands clenched into fists. Victoria Pemberton was the banker's wife, a sanctimonious woman who'd been trying to marry her son to Cordelia for 2 years. "Let them talk," Cordelia said coldly. "It's more than talk now," Martha continued. "They're threatening to boycott your business dealings. The cattle buyers, the grain suppliers, they're all part of Pemberton's social circle." The implications hit Cordelia like a physical blow. Without those business relationships, the ranch would struggle to survive, no matter how efficiently Maverick ran operations. "Is more," Martha said reluctantly. "They're also spreading rumors about that night during the storm, saying you and Maverick were alone together in improper circumstances." Heat flooded Cordelia's cheeks. "We were delivering a baby. I know that, and you know that. But Victoria Pemberton is telling a different story." That evening, Cordelia called Maverick to the main house. He arrived freshly washed, his dark hair still damp, wearing his best shirt. Even in his attempt at respectability, he radiated a raw masculinity that made her pulse race. "Sit," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. He remained standing. "Bad news travels fast on a ranch," he said quietly. "I heard about the town meeting. Then you know what this means." "I know what they want it to mean," he replied. "The question is whether you're going to let them dictate your life." Cordelia stood and paced to the window, her silk dress rustling with each step. "It's not that simple." "If I lose those business relationships, you'll survive," Maverick interrupted. "You're stronger than that." "Am I?" She turned to face him, her composure cracking. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I have been letting my emotions cloud my judgment." Maverick's eyes blazed. "Don't you dare let them make you ashamed of what you feel." "And what do I feel exactly?" As the question came out more vulnerable than she'd intended, he moved toward her with predatory grace, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides. "You feel the same thing I do," he said, his voice rough with desire. "This fire between us that gets stronger every day. It doesn't matter what I feel," she whispered. "I have responsibilities to who?" he demanded. "To a bunch of small-minded hypocrites who want to control your life, or to yourself." His hands came up to cup her face, and this time she didn't pull away. "Cordelia, I've spent 5 years drifting, looking for something worth fighting for." "You're worth fighting for." "The scandal, let them scandal," he said fiercely. "Let them talk until their tongues fall out. I don't care about their opinions, and neither should you." When he kissed her this time, it was with desperate passion, as if he could pour all his conviction into the contact. Cordelia's resistance crumbled completely, her arms winding around his neck as she kissed him back with equal fervor. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "I know I have no right to, but I love you." The words hit her like lightning, illuminating every dark corner of her heart. "Maverick, I'm not asking you to say it back," he continued. "I'm just asking you not to let them drive us apart." Cordelia pulled back to look into his eyes, seeing her own longing reflected there. In that moment, she made her choice. "Then we'd better give them something real to talk about," she said, and kissed him with all the passion she'd been holding. Back, outside, storm clouds gathered once again. The confrontation came at dawn, just as Cordelia had expected. Victoria Pemberton arrived with half the town's prominent citizens in tow, their carriages forming a disapproving semicircle in front of the mansion. Cordelia watched from her bedroom window as they arranged themselves like a tribunal, their faces set in expressions of righteous indignation. She dressed carefully in her finest black dress, not mourning clothes, but a statement of power. When she descended the front steps, Maverick fell into step beside her, his presence both protective and defiant. "Mrs. Ashworth," Victoria began, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "We've come as friends, concerned for your reputation and well-being." "How thoughtful," Cordelia replied coolly, "though I wasn't aware my well-being was any of your concern. When a respected member of our community engages in questionable behavior, it affects us all," the banker's wife continued. "Surely you can see how improper it is for an unmarried man to be living on your property, working so closely with you." Mr. Ironhide is my foreman, Cordelia said. He lives in the bunkhouse with the other hands. Come now, Victoria's voice turned sharp. You all know he's been seen entering your house at all hours. The storm night, for instance, when he helped deliver Betty Clearwater's baby, Maverick interrupted, his voice deadly quiet, along with Mrs. Ashworth and her housekeeper. So, you claim? Another voice called out. But who can verify that story? I can, said a familiar voice. Betty Clearwater emerged from behind the group, her baby daughter in her arms. This man and Mrs. Ashworth saved my life and my daughter's life. Anyone who says different is calling me a liar. Several other ranch hands began to gather, their presence shifting the balance of the confrontation. Buck Whitmore stepped forward, his weathered face grim. I had my doubts about Maverick when he first arrived, Buck said. But he's proven himself 10 times over. This ranch runs better now than it has in years. It's not the point, Victoria snapped. The point is propriety. The point, Cordelia interrupted, her voice ringing with authority. Is that you're trespassing on my property, making accusations based on gossip and spite? Victoria's face flushed red. We represent the moral standards. Of this community, you represent nothing but your own jealousy and small-mindedness, Cordelia shot back. And I'm done pretending otherwise. She stepped closer to Maverick, her hand finding his. The gesture was deliberate, defiant a public declaration that sent murmurs rippling through the crowd. Maverick Ironhide is the finest man I've ever known, she announced, her voice carrying across the yard. He's honest, hardworking, and treats everyone with respect regardless of their station. If that threatens your delicate sensibilities, I suggest you find somewhere else to direct your moral outrage. You're making a terrible mistake, Victoria hissed. When this scandal destroys your business relationships, when you're ruined and alone, don't come crying to us. I won't be alone, Cordelia said simply, squeezing Maverick's hand. I'll have a partner who values me for who I am, not what I own. Maverick's head turned sharply toward her, surprise and hope flickering in his blue eyes. She met his gaze steadily, her decision crystallizing with each word. Furthermore, she continued, never looking away from Maverick's face, I'm hereby announcing our engagement. The words rang out like a bell, silencing the crowd completely. Maverick's eyes widened, his lips parting in shock. Cordelia, he whispered, you don't have to. I'm not doing this for them, she said, her voice strong and clear. I'm doing it for us. Victoria Pemberton's face had gone purple with rage. This is ... This is an abomination. No decent person will associate with you after this. Now, surround myself with indecent people, Cordelia replied cheerfully. They're usually more interesting anyway. The banker's wife turned on her heel and stormed toward her carriage, her entourage trailing behind in a fluster of indignant whispers. As the last carriage disappeared down the drive, the ranch hands broke into cheers and applause. Maverick pulled Cordelia into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around as she laughed with pure joy. When he set her down, his expression was serious. Are you sure about this? He asked. Once we're married, there's no going back. You'll be tied to a man with nothing. But the clothes on his back? You have more than that, she said, her hands framing his face. You have integrity, courage, and a heart big enough to love all of me, not just my money or my social position. It's worth more than all the gold. In California. I love you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I love you too, she replied, finally speaking the words that had been burning in her heart for weeks, as they kissed in the morning sunlight. Surrounded by the people who truly mattered, thunder rumbled in the distance, but this time it sounded like applause from the heavens themselves. 6 months later, the wedding of Cordelia, Ashworth, and Maverick. Ironhide became the event that divided the county into 2 camps, those who attended and those who stayed away in protest. The ceremony took place on the ranch itself, under a natural arch of oak trees that had witnessed generations of love and loss. Cordelia wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her curves, while Maverick stood waiting in a black suit that emphasized his powerful frame. His dark hair was tamed for the occasion, but his blue eyes blazed with the same intensity that had captivated her from their first meeting. Pastor Williams, driven out from 3 counties away after the local Lillette Minister refused to perform the ceremony, spoke of love conquering all obstacles. But it was the vows they'd written themselves that brought tears to the eyes of everyone present. "I came to your door a broken man," Maverick said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd, begging for food to fill my empty belly. "But you fed something deeper my starving soul.
Yes.
You saw worth in me when I couldn't see it in myself." Cordelia's voice was steady despite her tears. "You came into my life like a storm, disrupting everything I thought I knew about love and propriety. You taught me that a woman's greatest strength isn't in conforming to others' expectations, but in choosing her own path. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was witnessed by every ranch hand, by Betty Clearwater, with her healthy baby girl, by Martha wiping proud tears from her eyes. Even Buck Whitmore was seen dabbing at his eyes with a bandana. The celebration lasted until dawn, with fiddle music and dancing under the stars. Cordelia had never felt more beautiful than when Maverick swept her around the makeshift dance floor, her wedding dress flowing around them like captured moonlight. As the sun rose over their land, truly their land now, they stood together on the porch of what was no longer just her house, but their home. "Any regrets?" Maverick asked, his arm around her waist. Cordelia leaned into his warmth, thinking of the business relationship she'd lost, the social invitations that had stopped coming, the whispers that followed them in town. Then she thought of waking up every morning next to the man she loved, of working side by side to build something meaningful, of the children they'd talked about having. "Just one," she said, smiling up at him. His expression grew concerned. "What's that?" "I regret that it took you 3 days without food to find your way to my door," she said. "I wish you'd arrived sooner." His laughter rumbled through his chest as he pulled her closer. "Worth the wait," he said. "Some things are worth waiting for." "Speaking of waiting," Cordelia said with a mischievous smile, "I have news. Oh, Betty isn't the only one who's going to be a mother soon." Maverick's eyes went wide, then blazed with joy as he lifted her off her feet and spun her around. "Are you sure?" "Martha's already started knitting baby clothes," Cordelia laughed. "She says she can tell these things." As they kissed in the golden morning light, the ranch spreading out around them in all directions, Cordelia reflected on the strange path that had brought them together. A desperate cowboy's plea for food had led to a love that defied convention and conquered every obstacle placed in their path. The townspeople who'd tried to shame them gradually came to respect the success of their partnership. Under their joint management, becoming the most prosperous operation in 3 counties. Their children, 3 sons and 2 daughters, grew up knowing that love was worth fighting for. That convention was less important than character, years later. When granddaughters asked Cordelia to tell the story of how she met their grandfather, she would always smile and begin the same way. It started with the simplest request, a hungry man asking for food. What he really needed was love, and what I really needed was the courage to give it. And in the golden twilight of their lives, surrounded by family and prosperity built on mutual respect and unwavering devotion, Cordelia and Maverick would sit on their porch and know that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as the most unexpected packages. Their love story had scandalized a generation and inspired the next, proving that when 2 hearts are meant to be together, neither hunger nor social convention can keep them apart. The giant cowboy had indeed served the rich woman faithfully, not as a servant, but as a true partner in every sense of the word. And she had fed him not just with food, but with the love that had been the missing ingredient in both their lives. In the end, they had saved each other,